I should have known something was off when Chloe's message said just casual. Nothing in our family is ever just anything. There's always a layer beneath the surface, a subtext you're expected to decode. But I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that maybe after everything, they had finally stopped seeing me as the girl who made the unwise choice to step off the safe path. The black sheep with her little project. It had been 2 years since I'd seen most of them, not out of spite, just space. I was building something from nothing, and that took everything I had. Time, focus, sacrifice. But deep down, I still thought of them, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, as part of my foundation. Maybe they'd ask how things were going. Maybe someone would finally say, "I'm proud of you." But when I walked into the private dining room at Bistro Ardent, all designer finishes and dim mood lighting, I felt it right away. That heavy pause, that flicker of performative smiles. Aunt Linda barely masked her glance, her eyes scanning me up and down like she was inspecting a knockoff. I wore my best, tailored slacks, a navy silk blouse, ankle boots. But I could tell she was expecting more, or less. I was never sure with her. "Didn't think you'd show," she said with a sharp smile. "But you were still struggling with your little project." I smiled back, tightly. Struggling is part of building, comes before the winning. Her face froze for half a second. Then she sipped her Chardonnay. We sat down. Polite conversation rippled through the table like forced small talk at a networking event. No one asked about my work. Chloe chatted about her promotion at the firm. Jake, my older cousin, talked about the new boat he financed. No one asked where I'd been or how I was doing. I became a spectator at my own family's table. Then the check arrived. It landed like a punctuation mark. Everyone reached for their wine. No one touched their wallet. Uncle Robert leaned back smirking. "Well, I assume Elise will be paying her own way. We know you've been doing your own thing lately." That tone, that condescending grin. Chloe looked down at her plate, not a word. Then came the dagger. Aunt Linda, swirling her glass. "Of course, we shouldn't be covering anyone's tab, not at our age." And then, the word that would echo in my mind for days. "She's always been a bit of a burden." She laughed like it was just family ribbing. But her eyes stayed locked on mine. Sharp, cold, unapologetic. And no one stopped her. Not Chloe. Not Robert. Not anyone. I felt my breath catch in my chest, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. This wasn't a dinner and bite. It was a performance, a setup. I was the cautionary tale they'd summoned to validate their choices. And now, when they thought I had nothing, they wanted to see me squirm. But I didn't flinch. Not yet. I simply sat there, still and quiet, tasting the sour truth behind every smiling face at that table. They hadn't missed me. They had written me off. And this dinner, it wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. That would have given them the satisfaction, the illusion that their judgment meant something. Instead, I reached calmly into my handbag and pulled out my slim leather wallet. It opened like a well-rehearsed performance. 6 identical black cards sat in a perfect row, tucked into their sleeves with silent authority. I chose the third one from the left, my primary corporate account. No gold foil, no flashy color, just a quiet, matte surface with weight behind it, both literal and symbolic. A card they didn't recognize because they'd never had reason to. I laid it on the table. No drama, no flourish. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'll get the bill." A pause followed, the kind that makes people glance at each other for permission. Uncle Robert shifted in his chair. Aunt Linda blinked like someone had thrown off her script. Chloe hesitated, her eyes narrowing, trying to read the situation. The waiter, professional and poised, stepped forward and picked up the card with practiced neutrality. But I caught it, the brief flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly what kind of card that was. He returned minutes later, leather folio in hand, quiet as a ghost. And then, in a tone low enough for discretion but just loud enough for impact, he leaned slightly toward me and said, "Your remaining balance on this account is $3.2 million, ma'am. Would you like a printed receipt?" I didn't look at him. I didn't have to. What I did notice was the ripple of reaction around the table. Aunt Linda's glass halted mid-sip, her hand suddenly unsure. Her painted nails trembled slightly as she set it down. Uncle Robert sat upright, as if the chair had shocked him. Chloe's fork hit the plate with a soft clang. Her eyes were locked on mine, mouth parted just enough to betray what she was thinking. I signed the receipt with a slow, unhurried stroke of my pen. Then I closed the folio and passed it back, offering the waiter a nod of thanks. Only then did I speak again. "It's a business card," I said, casually resting my hands on the table. "One of the perks when your little project lands a seven-figure investment." The silence was thick. Not heavy, not awkward, but stunned. Like the moment just after a lightning strike, when the world goes still in disbelief. I let it sit there. I let them feel it. Because this wasn't about money. It was about what they assumed I didn't have. They had decided my value before I even walked into the room. They thought the startup was a fantasy, that I was playing dress-up in the adult world while they lived the real lives. But here I was, paying their bill without blinking, without breaking, without bitterness in my voice. I wasn't showing off. I was correcting the record. For years, they'd spoken about me like I was a failure waiting to happen. That night, I became the quiet fact they couldn't ignore. And it only took one card to remind them. The burden they dismissed. She built an empire in silence. It's not that I couldn't have told them. I had every opportunity. There were headlines, press releases, even a podcast feature that briefly charted on the startup circuit. My name had been in places that would have made them pause, if they'd ever bothered to look. But I didn't broadcast it. I didn't send out glossy postcards with CEO Elise Ray embossed in gold. I didn't change my email signature to flaunt my title or fill my social feed with curated shots of conference panels and product launches. Because I remembered what it felt like to have nothing. Not nothing in the dramatic sense, not homelessness or hunger, but the slow, quiet erosion of dignity that comes from trying your hardest while the world pretends not to see you. I remembered watching my bank account drain to $18.47 and pretending it was fine. I remembered boiling the same bag of pasta for the third night in a row and calling it focused budgeting. I remembered signing a lease I wasn't sure I could keep, and waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing with no solution in sight. I remembered building a pitch deck through tears after my best friend, someone I'd known since college, told me she believed in me but not in the business. She was just being smart, she said, protecting the friendship. But it still felt like a door slamming shut when I needed one to open. And through all of that, the early mornings, the silent nights, the fear, the hope, no one from my family called to ask if I was okay. What they did say, when I dared to bring up what I was building, stuck with me in ways I can't forget. "You should get a real job. This generation always wants to skip the hard part. You're not cut out for that world, Elise. You're too sensitive." They didn't see my tenacity. They saw fragility. They didn't see risk. They saw failure before it even happened. So I stopped trying to explain. I learned how to move in silence, how to listen more than I spoke, how to take every dismissive comment and file it under fuel. Not rage, not revenge, just a quiet decision to prove, first to myself and then to no one at all, that I could build something real. And when the funding came, when the deal closed and the bank account surged, I didn't run to them. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt exhausted, because they weren't part of the journey and they never wanted to be. And when our product landed on the shelves of not one, not two, but 3 national retailers, I still hesitated before telling anyone. Not because I wasn't proud. I was, but because I knew their congratulations would ring hollow. Performative. Too late. I never expected support, even in success. But I didn't expect that dinner, either. The cruelty disguised as banter. The word burden slipping so casually from their lips like it was a punchline, not a judgment. That kind of humiliation doesn't fade. It lives under the skin, in the quiet between conversations, in the space where applause should have been. The message came through late in the evening, 2 days after the dinner, like Schlo had been sitting with it, waiting for just enough time to pass for her words to sound composed rather than confrontational. "You embarrassed everyone. Why didn't you just let us split the check?" There it was. Not "we're sorry." Not "that was out of line." Not even "what you've built is incredible." Just embarrassment. Like their discomfort deserved more attention than my humiliation. I stared at the screen for a full minute, my first instinct was to ignore it. Let it rot in the unread messages pile, right next to birthday invites from people who hadn't spoken to me in years and networking requests from people who once called me naive. But I typed back anyway, slowly, carefully, truthfully. Because you made it clear I wasn't one of you. So I paid like someone who isn't. I didn't hear back. And that silence told me more than any argument ever could. Because the truth, the one I've been circling around for years, had finally crystallized in the space between those words. They didn't resent me because I failed. They resented me because I didn't. They had made peace with a version of me that stayed small, palatable, easy to dismiss with polite pity and casual cruelty. The version of me who apologized for trying, who absorbed their backhanded remarks with a smile, who showed up alone and left early. They liked me best when I fit the narrative, the struggling dreamer with the quirky ideas and bad timing. Someone they could feel good about inviting to dinner out of charity, not respect. Because my success, quiet, hard-earned, unassisted, disrupted something deeply embedded in their comfort. It forced them to look at their own choices, their own limitations, their own lack of risk. They wanted me to succeed just enough to make them look generous, but not enough to threaten the hierarchy they had built for themselves. My card didn't just pay for dinner, it exposed them. It stripped away the illusion that I needed them, that I'd been waiting for their approval, that I was still in some shadow, hoping they'd pull me into the light. I wasn't. I hadn't been for a long time, and that's what they hated. Not the number on the receipt, not the balance on the card, but the independence. The reminder that I didn't owe them anything, that I had outgrown their condescension without asking permission, that their opinion had become irrelevant somewhere along the way, and I hadn't paused to let them know. To people like Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, power was always in the perception. The way they could tilt a room with a remark, reduce someone's worth to a laugh line. But the moment I matched their smugness with silence and strength, their grip on the script collapsed. They were no longer the ones deciding who belonged and who didn't. And for people who built their identity on control, that loss is unbearable. It's strange how a single word can hover in the air longer than the sound it makes. Burden, just 2 syllables, soft on the tongue, sharp in the soul. They meant it to sting, to cut, to fold me back into the shape they were comfortable with, small, needy, dependent. A disappointment, but a familiar one. But the truth is, I've worn heavier labels. Failed, naive, difficult, emotional. I've heard them whispered behind my back, disguised as concern. I've felt the sting of 1,000 passive-aggressive comments that all circled the same sentiment: you're not enough. So when they said burden, it should have been the final blow. A word meant to crush. Instead, it freed me. Because in that moment, I saw the game for what it was, and I stepped out of it. I paid the bill, not out of pride, not to prove a point, but to put an end to the conversation they were trying to have without really having it. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why they still saw me as the version of myself from 5 years ago. I just placed the card down like a period at the end of a sentence they didn't get to finish. And when the balance came out, when the waiter spoke those numbers that changed the temperature of the room, I felt the power shift. It wasn't about the money. It was about the silence, about the way their faces told a story they could no longer control. The version of me they had constructed, fragile, dependent, laughable, collapsed under the weight of a truth they had never cared to learn. I left that night not angry, not broken, but clear. Clear on who they were, clear on who I was, and clear on what I would no longer tolerate. In their world, I was only ever worthy if I played the part they'd written for me. But in mine, I didn't need their script. I was already building something better, something real. A team that sees me not as a girl with a wild idea, but as a leader. Partners who bring their best to the table not because they're obligated, but because they believe. Friends who celebrate the smallest wins like they're the biggest triumphs, who don't need me to shrink so they can feel tall. And most importantly, I've built a version of myself I trust. I've redefined my worth not in titles or balance sheets, but in resilience, in showing up on the hard days, in choosing dignity over validation, in knowing that I can walk into any room, even the ones that try to exile me, and sit tall. So yes, Let them keep calling me the burden if it helps them sleep. Because now I understand what that word really means to them. It means I didn't fold when they expected me to. It means I didn't need them to become more than they imagined. It means I refused to beg for a seat at their table and then built my own. And the moment I paid that check, I paid more than a bill. I paid the price of their illusion and walked away with freedom.